I think we can go right into financial affairs. So I'll take roll call. Do it in the order I see you on my screen. Mr. Epps.
Present.
Mr. Schultz.
Present.
Ms. Mulhern.
Here.
Mr. Cohen.
Present.
Ms. Haywood.
Present.
Ms. Lohman.
Present.
Mr. Burdell Williams.
Present.
And Ms. Henry.
Present.
And I'm Joel Fishbein, and I'm present. And I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last Financial Affairs Committee meeting. Do I have a motion?
So move, Charles Burdell Williams.
Do I have a second?
Second, Jennifer Lohman.
And I'll ask for a vote. All in favor of approval of those minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, the motion carries and the minutes are approved. And I'll now turn the meeting over to Lou Kim and Chuck Linderman. I'm not sure which or if both will be presenting. So thank you to the team.
I'm gonna take care of it tonight and just divert to Lou if needed. Got it. Quite a large looking agenda. Hopefully some of them will go fast. Some of them will not go fast. But you know, we will persevere through this. So first thing we're going to do is review the 2021, 2022 budget and where we stand, and also at the same time we're going to look at the 22-23 budget. So this is a layout. It shows the current budget, shows our estimated actual on a very high level. This is on a major function level. Shows what our proposed budget is at this current point right now. Shows an increase over the 21-22 budget and an increase over the 21-22 estimate, and also what the percentage of each category is. So right now, revenues are doing pretty well. We are having another pretty good year continuing to collect those long-term tax assessment appeals. We are actually over $1 million in that again this year. That will stop eventually. We have a couple years of a few of the really big ones that the settlement was that they pay over multiple years. So we have a couple more years left of a few of them. Some of them will finish being paid off this year, and others will continue like the big ones. So right now we're on course to be about $2.9 million to the good. Most of that's in revenue. Expenditures were about 600,000, almost 700,000 under our budget, but revenues we've exceeded a lot of that. You can see in the federal line item up there in the revenue is really COVID related, and then again in the local, we are in the beginning of the year we were feeling a pretty good influx of transfer tax. That seems to have slowed down slightly as the interest rates are going up. So we're being cautious about what we budget for next year, not to continue in an upward trend as dramatic as it's been over the past, say, 12 months or a little more. So again, state sources, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're a little bit under there, and I'll try and explain some of that when we get to the state slide. This is another way of looking at the same information, just on an object level, and the objects are kind of what we are spending on within the functions. The functions are the kind of areas of the budget that you would think about: instructional, special ed, administrative, transportation, maintenance. And then in each function are categories which are listed here. The biggest categories are, of course, salary and benefits. And then other areas are in there: professional services, purchase services. I will note the one question from last month. We do have a kind of lopsided between our 400s and our 600s, the purchase property service and books and supplies. The state every now and then tells us, and usually it's not till after the year starts, that they want us to change things. So prior to this year, we were actually charging the utilities in the 400 level or 400 objects. We're now required to charge them to the 600 objects. So there'll be a corresponding budget transfer to make those things line back up into place. Expenditure assumptions for the year, these are kind of no big difference. Salary and benefits are our biggest, about 65% of the budget. Operations, including our utilities and insurance and leases, are big. Technology, operations, educational renewals, transportation. Again, last year we spent $5 million on transportation. This year we're probably going to spend in the tune of $8.5 million. That's closer to normal for you. And our debt service, which we're going to talk about what happened with the debt refinancing. Again, this budget makes some very limited assumptions on the teacher's contract, because it is expiring this June and it has not been settled. We do have incorporated in the budget the VEC contract. Just a couple large hits here to show you charter schools, and we're going to talk about that. We have a semi glimmer of good news in the charter school. Tremendous, but it's sort of. And the benefits, while the original number was significantly higher than this, it has our second look rates for the medical and the prescription are down to a blended 10% rate, with medical being just under 8%, and the prescription still continues to really outpace everything, especially with things like specialty drugs being just going through the roof for cost. And again, for those not aware, we self-fund these benefits. So whatever our costs are, we pay Independence Blue Cross through the CPAS group for all of our claims. We do have a stop loss insurance up to, so any claims that are over $425,000 get paid for by the stop loss insurance. But these are our numbers for right now. This is just a pie chart of our expenses, and you can see the two biggest pieces of the pie are salaries and benefits. The next largest piece of the pie there are actually other contracted services, and that contracted services, and that includes things like tuition to other schools, which includes charter schools, includes intermediate unit operations, includes the Eastern Technical School, includes all your approved private schools that you're sending students to, and then so on. So this is the state budget. Now, the left column shows what we actually got last year. The second to the left column is our 21-22 budget, and for some reason, transportation is broken out into non-public transportation and transportation. We combine them for ease of use. The basic ed and special ed numbers, we are actually, as I said last month, we are proposing, we budgeted for 21-22 based on what we actually received in 2021 for the the governor's allocation, what the governor's allocation was actually done. And we're going to use the 21-22 allocation numbers for the budget for 22-23 because the governor's budget right now is very unrealistic and not going to, probably doesn't stand a chance of getting passed. It would be great if it gets passed. It'd be great if they would pass a budget early enough that schools could actually use the budget numbers, but the state never does that. Again, I think I told you last month, it's a little pet peeve of mine for 40 years is, they approve a budget on June 28th and think it's approved early, not realizing that just about every school in the Commonwealth has approved their budget, well before that. Told you I wanted to update you a little bit on charter school tuition. It has reduced by 9 students since last month. Last month we were over budget. Our over budget estimate was about 287,000. We reduced 9 students, so it went down about $93,000. Now, on the good side, we're down 9 students total. On the bad side, we're actually up special ed students, or it would have gone down in cost a little bit further. As you go up, our special ed costs are $45,000 a student versus our regular ed costs, which are only about $18,000 a student. So we've kept the budget at the same number that we proposed originally for it, because there will be an increase in the tuition rate for next year. So even if it stays at 144, it's going to just kind of float in just under that 3.6 million. If it stayed right at that and nothing changed. So not a significant change, but if the numbers keep reducing, eventually you would have some money here to deal with. So this is a really high level view of the budget right now. And I'm going to tell you here the audited numbers for 2021. You saw we had it, we did do great. Again, part of the reason was our expenditures were depressed because of things like COVID. Again, I used the transportation, half of that number, we would have been $3 million higher if transportation costs were used all year. Then you have this year's budget. The revenues we had budgeted 122 million, and we're actually going to end up with 125. We budgeted to use $465,000 in fund balance. We will not. I'm almost sure we will not use any fund balance. You will actually gain fund balance. Whether it's 2.9 million or whether it's 1.9 million or whether it's 3.5 million. As every month goes by, we'll be able to drill that down. But right now, with the proposed budget for 22-23, we're looking at revenues, not including any tax increase, of about 125 million. And that would be higher, although we're depressing some of the state budget. I'll go back to, if you go to the transportation line here, one of the things that happened with COVID, and we're working on that, it actually came out in the PASBO, the review we had of the transportation department, is we actually ended up, we're going to end up a little bit less in our transportation subsidy for this year, and not even come close to that 1.3 million. Actually, the projection was for it to be at just over 700,000. So we were going to be over 600,000 short of this budget. We have made some adjustments based on the transportation report. Derek made those adjustments actually today. Dr. Scriven signed a revised submission where you're permitted to turn in, since you did pay your contractor a portion of the amount of money due, even on days they didn't run. So we're hoping to get that back up and get the over 600,000 back. We will count that in when it comes in. However, next year's numbers, the expenditures are about 127,584,000, and again, that's a very modest increase on the in the salaries. We know the BEC, we don't know the CEA. We've put a modest increase in there for that, something that is affordable. Now, the millage required, if you were to just pass it like this, would actually be under the Act 1 index. I know it's not 0, but it's under the Act 1 index. You could go to 3.4%. This is actually 2.7% as it stands right now, and so, it could go as high as 3.4%, but that would mean either we're losing revenues or we're adding expenditures on. This is the chart of all the Act 1 index and what your tax increase has been. Basically, it's been since 2017-18 since you had a tax increase below the index. So from 18-19 through last year, you were at the index level. Again, I hate this chart because you guys really look bad in this chart. It's the millage rate comparison. This is this year's millage rates for every school district in Montgomery County. And that bar on the left that is the highest is Cheltenham. So you've seen this before. This is just where everybody is. The budget calendar is going to require that next month you adopt a proposed final budget. We will review that at the Financial Affairs Committee meeting on May the 3rd. And then you're going to have to vote on the proposed final budget at the legislative meeting. Now, again, my analogy, and I know it's like the old dad joke, this budget that you're approving next month is not the final budget, so you don't have to be happy with it. Again, I liken it to your prom date. You kind of like her, and you're going to take her to the prom, or you're going to marry her. I don't know. You got to see what happens with the numbers and everything. So, you know, it's your proposed budget. Actually, and then in June we'll review the final financial affairs budget on June 7th and have the budget go out on be finally approved at the legislative meeting. Now that is the June 14th budget is the one you're getting married to. So that would be the kind of final deadline on that one. Joel, you want to take questions here? Or you want to wait to the end? I'm done the budget and the 21-22 overview.
Oh, do any of the board members have questions so far? I see one hand raised, two hands raised, and they are now three. I'll call in the order I see them. Ms. Haywood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Linderman. A really minor question, and don't know if we've looked at this, and you may not have the answer this evening, but I know that we did the LED project replacement, and I know that we have several LEED buildings, and just was wondering whether we have done kind of an analysis of any savings that we have netted from those two, well, the LED project, as well as, you know, obviously having LEED efficient buildings.
I'm not aware of those. Again, I'll have to circle back with Dr. Scriven, and we'll have to get with Mr. Holman and see who was here when they were done. I know our electricity bill has been is going down a little tiny bit next year. I don't know, when was the LED project actually done? Do you remember?
Mr. Cohen, do you remember? I know that you were integrally involved with that.
I do not have a good sense of time. I want to say 3 years ago, but if somebody else wants to opine, I certainly welcome that.
I'll check it out.
Thank you.
Was that it, Ms. Haywood?
Yes, Mr. Fishbein, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Mr. Epps?
Thank you, Mr. Fishbein. Mr. Linderman, thanks for the presentation. I just have 3 quick questions. In terms of the 9 students that left, I believe if I understood that right, left the charter school, do we, how much accounting do we have for like when they, if any, come back to the district, and when?
Well, I'd have to get with the pupil services department. Gwen and I and Lou, we kind of monitor that. She's pretty good on checking out things about back and forth with people. I'd have to check on who came back. I just saw a thing today with one of the charter schools. We had 2 or 3 of these 9 actually came back from, but she's pretty much on that. I can get with her and see what
It was more of a process question for this moment. And I think I heard you say there's some kind of, and I even think I heard you say 2 of the 9 maybe come back, but there's some sort of notification, I guess, obviously people services when they register for a school, but just broadly, do we know, like, what's the process that you can speak to?
Well, so every month the charter schools send us a bill, and on the bill, they have to detail every student by name, by grade, by age, by address. And every month, Gwen Santiago analyzes each bill, verifies that each student is a Cheltenham resident and is not registered anywhere else, either at a non-public school or at one of our schools. If they're new, if they're already at the school, she just validates that they're still going there. And if they come back, she knows they've come back and she takes them off. We adjust that, or we notify the charter school that, hey, this student has come back. Sometimes the charter schools don't even know they've come back, especially the cyber schools. And you have 127 of your 144 students are cyber school. So, you don't have a lot of brick and mortar schools. So she's on that. That's the better part of a lot of her days, I would gather, is dealing with the charter school enrollments, attendance, withdrawals.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I won't belabor that point. You mentioned a 2.9 million, but actually, before I move forward, you raised up charter schools and when cyber charters, and when students leave a cyber charter, they don't necessarily come back to the district, go somewhere else. But that's which may be more. That's where my head was going now, but I don't want to explore that too much right now. You mentioned a $2.9 million fund balance. The number may change or so forth. Is that total, or does that represent unassigned, or is that the total?
Now that would be total before assignments or commitments, and that would be added to the current fund balance. So it's an increase to the fund balance. So just to be clear. So. And I'm going to get to some things when we you started some preliminary talks with Mr. Holman on the capital projects and things like that, and I have that as a quick discussion item for finance, because that's where it would reside, the financing of it. And I have some ideas, and Dr. Scriven's well aware of the ideas, and you talk about 2-tiered budget, and we'll talk about that when we get to that tonight.
Appreciate it. And then last, to the extent that it's appropriate, you mentioned the budget represented a modest increase. To the extent that you can answer it in this setting, a modest increase around labor. What does modest represent?
Not much. It's probably all in of around all in. It's around 2%.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it for me. I appreciate it.
You, Mr. Epps. Mr. Schultz, you're up.
Thank you. And so first, a process question. So this is sort of the lowest level we've gotten from a budget perspective, but this will still continue to be refined. This isn't like a final, it's not a final, but it's still considered a draft budget, correct?
Correct. And actually, when you approve the proposed budget, that'll still be a draft in a sense too. It's not final till June 14th, assuming 5 people say yes to vote on it.
Thank you. I had some questions around the increase in expenditures. One is a clarifying question around transportation costs that were budgeted in 21-22. And what is the change in transportation cost from the 21-22 budget to the 22-23 budget? I know we have an agenda item later, but I assume that's kind of baked into, is that baked into this budget?
Yeah, actually, one of the better numbers you have for this year is you have no increase in your transportation contract budget for next year. It was part of the contract that was renewed in 2017 was an increase of 0 for between 21-22 and 22-23. And so that number will stay relatively the same at around $8.5 million. Last year's budget 2021 was actually closer to $8.2 million because it was that's what we would have done had we bust every day like a normal year. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And for 21-22, you actually had around a 3.3% plus or minus increase in the budget for 21-22 for busing, which kind of exasperated because you only spent $5 million last year, and now we have to budget $8.5 million. So,
great. Thank you. So my question, two questions. One is around the 18% increase in the other contracted services. I think it's going from 16.5 to 19.1. I was curious what that's a large jump, larger than the what we've talked about so far in terms of what was highlighted. So I'd love to understand a little more about that. But then the other question is related to the last Ed Affairs presentation, where we talked about a change to the way we're doing our autism support program. And I was curious if those new hires are part of this budget already, or if they're reflected somewhere else in the numbers.
Yeah, and those new hire, the change in our budgeting, we've still continued to keep them in the other contracted services area for now, until you actually move them, formally. So they will move out of there. So that number will come down. Correspondingly, the salary number will go up then, because if you're going to take $500,000 of contracted services and convert it into salaries and benefits, those are going to go up there too. So that's kind of the hard part about budgeting for this year. I'm hoping that because we've continued to budget the other contracted services in a manner that you were used to in the past, that will more than provide enough budget to do what is being planned by the special ed department and the ed affairs people.
Thank you. And regarding the increase, though, because that was already built into the previous years.
Right.
So, we can talk about it offline as well. I don't know if I don't want to catch you off guard in terms of addressing that particular line item.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's what, 2.5 or 2.86 million. Now 400 and some thousand of it is charter school numbers, because that's in there, those numbers too. Your Eastern Tech did not go up, so that was 0. It actually went down a little, but not a significant amount to say that. So we can do a deeper dive into that.
Great. Thank you very much. That was all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And I believe Ms. Henry, you had your hand up. Did you lower it?
I lowered it. My question actually got answered.
That's very efficient. Great. Thank you. That's all that we have from board members. I see no. I would invite the one non-panelist member of the public to raise your hand if you have a question. And if you don't, that's fine too. Seeing no raised hands, why don't we move on to the next agenda item, Mr. Linderman?
Okay, we did finalize the refinancing, the We did not see the $6 million we wanted, and let me explain a little about how that worked. We actually saw closer to $4.5 million in savings. Now, we did not refinance everything. There were three major types of refinancing. If you remember, there was a taxable refinancing, there was a tax exempt refinancing, and then there was an advanced refinancing. They chose not to do the advanced refinancing because the interest rates, as you guys are all aware, we approved this, and then, a few weeks later, the world goes to watching everything in the Ukraine, and the interest rates start sailing. So we were able to still get substantial savings on this. So this shows you what is actually happening to our budget. So you will have another bite at the apple, so to speak. The advanced refunding would have cost you money to fund it in advance. Now, the advisors, in staying within the parameters of the parameters resolution, said, well, if we don't do the advanced refunding, you can actually wait till October when it becomes a regular refinancing then. And still, if the interest rates are favorable, you'll have a refinancing and you'll be able to save even more money during the year. So there's a possibility, if you do a refinancing in October this year, that you could even affect the 22-23 budget somewhat in some point for this year, and probably more affect the 23-24 budget in the savings from that. But because you'd be doing the refinancing in the first half of the year, the second half payments would have an impact on it. So you can see what we did. I tried to do this in the same format we did the last refinancing to show you, and I'm glad to share any further details with anybody that wants them. I could send out, but I'm pleased at what we got. Of course, I'm disappointed. I actually thought once the war started that we would not be doing this, but the interest rates stayed good for us. We actually are going to settlement next week, so they lock them in, and they will go to settlement next week. Now, ironically, had they waited one more week, your savings might have been almost half of what you're seeing now, because the rates continue to go. So that's the refinancing. I just wanted to update you a little bit on that. Now, we started talking last month about transportation contract renewal, and it is up. You have a transportation contract through the 23-24 year, and you heard me say your increase for next year, you actually don't have an increase for next year. And I've spoken several times with Eric Faust with Cheltenham Trans. They are very interested in a renewal to the contract. However, they do have some significant costs that they've kind of eaten, and everybody's kind of eaten over the past couple years of things happening with labor shortages and things like that. So Dr. Scriven and I have been working on this. We talked about it, as late as this afternoon. We do have some numbers that they gave me. Their labor cost over the past couple of years have gone up 28%. Their equipment costs are going up 18.5%. Their maintenance costs have gone up 23%. Their insurance costs have gone up 71%. So they've been with you for 9 years now. This is their 9th year. They took over a very tumultuous contract you had at the time 9 years ago, from what I gather, and talking to not only them, but to talking to some people that were around then. So he has sent a proposal for 5 years, and year one of the contract would go from, we pay $320 a day right now for a big bus, and they wanted to go to $384. So we pay $320 this year. We'll pay $320 next year. They wanted to go to $384, and then every year after that, it goes up about 3%. So the first year is about a 20% increase. I did talk to them today and say that, or I talked to them a couple of weeks ago, and I talked to them today, and I said that's a pretty big increase to swallow. That's a large dollar amount to hit a budget for 23-24. So, but again, they do a pretty good job. They have pretty good labor harmony. They actually bought a piece of ground, not in Cheltenham, but it's right over the border, to house Cheltenham buses and to put the big propane tank that fuels our buses there. So it's like, I guess it's in Orland. I guess that's Springfield Township. They do their own training for CDL. Based on your request, they went to a fully propane clean air bus fleet. And so I don't know, Dr. Scriven, you want to add anything?
No, we have to make a decision as to, are we going to do a full RFP? I will ask Mr. Linderman to send you the documentation that was forwarded to us from the current bus contractor so that you all can review. I will get with Mr. Schultz and Mr. Fishbein in terms of a recommendation to the full board, but our window of time, if we're going to do our RFP, is rapidly closing. So there's a decision that we have to make. That's the short and the skinny of it. So Chuck, do you have those documents electronically?
Yep. Yeah, and I can send them to everybody right now if you want. I'm going to tell you, we will probably, you're probably going to, no matter what you do, you're going to see a significant increase to your bus contract in 23-24. Will it be 20%? I don't know. But it's going to be significant. I know we're on the south end of average for cost of our busing and things. So I have some real fears. I did tell Eric today, I said, I don't know how the school board can afford a 20% increase in 1 year, because that would be, you heard me talk, the bus contract is $8.5 million. That's $1.7 million. That's pretty significant. You'd basically have to hope your teachers and your other groups want to take a zero increase for those years. And I mean zero, I mean absolute zero. Is there a school board email?
Yeah, Cheltenham School Board.
Is it schoolboard@cheltenham.org? Does that go to all you guys in without me typing everybody's name in?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, for saving of time, I just did that. So hopefully it went to all you guys. So again, Dr. Scriven knows I'm not excited about doing an RFP for busing. It could come back to haunt you. I know at least one other local school district recently did one and got higher prices than they were quoted. Not saying that would happen to us, but again, So,
That
okay.
was an exasperating agenda item. Do you want to stop for questions about that?
Yeah, just go ahead. I don't know what else to say. I don't want to, I do understand they need a large increase. Yeah, I mean, think about the cost and the capital cost involved in busing, and just, the driver shortages, that was all over the news nationwide. Significant increases had to be given to drivers. I mean, they got to pay bonuses for drivers and things like that. Not saying you guys have to pay all of that, but on top of the fact that you're actually rolling into a year where you have no increase in your bus contract for next year. So I kind of look at that too, but again, I just think 20% to me was a tad too high. I would have much rather seen a smaller, even though a significant number early on, and then maybe a number that was slightly higher in the out 4 years. But that's just me. You guys have to live with this.
All right, before I go out to questions on this agenda item, I do want to suggest that this is the kind of thing that might require negotiations that are better done not in a public setting, and to the extent that comments might reflect one or more board members' views about how we ought to negotiate this, I think that would be properly done in executive session. And with that caveat, I'll call on the people who have their hands raised as I see them in the order on my screen. Ms. Haywood?
Thank you, Mr. Fishbein, and thank you for those cautionary words and advice. This hopefully will not stray into that area. This is just really a factual question. Mr. Linderman, I know the proposal is for 20% in year one. What are the out years 2, 3, and 4% increases proposed?
3%.
3% every year after that. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Was that it, Ms. Haywood?
Yes, Mr. Fishbein, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Henry?
Yes, a quick question around if we were to decide that it was a worthwhile option to go to an RFP. If this is what their proposal is now, and we decided to go to RFP, would they then have to bid in an RFP?
Yes.
All right, and so is the concern that if we go to RFP, they will bid higher than the 20% that they're already saying?
It's possible. One local district saw that happen.
Okay, and you wouldn't happen to know what percentage it increased for them, do you?
Well, they are going to end up, our number in 23-24 is 384. They are over 400 now.
Okay.
For 23-24.
Okay. All right. So that's
It's just something to think about.
right.
I'm not saying that's going to happen. Might not happen.
But it's a question consideration. I just wanted to, just to know how that worked.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you. That's all I had.
Mr. Cohen, thank you, Ms. Henry. Mr. Cohen?
Thank you. 3 questions, 2 of which I'm going to preface, and I'll preface them again when I make them, that I'm not looking for an answer now because of Mr. Fishbein's point in related matters. The first question, though, I would like a response to, if possible, is do we have a sense of why the cost is increasing so dramatically for insurance, 71%?
No, I could ask that, but I've seen that in other contractors.
Okay, and I do recognize that it might be out of control, but I would just like to know that. The second and third questions, and again, I'll preface this by saying that I would like this information, if possible, outside of this meeting. The first would be, I'd like to see a breakdown of their proposed costs in terms of, for example, capital, operations, insurance, and other related aspects as well. And my last question comment is, I'd be interested to know about what we think their prospective pool is of potential companies that could bid on an RFP. And again, looking for that offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Seeing no other raised hands, I'll go out to the community. There's one person. If Maureen would like to ask a question on this agenda item, she may raise her hand. And if I don't see that in the next few seconds, we'll move on to the next agenda item. So go ahead, Mr. Linderman. Thank you.
Okay, this will be quick. We received proposals from 3 food service contractors on Friday. We have a committee made up of 1 board member. Thank you, Mr. Fishbein, and Ms. Kim, myself, Ms. Keen from the district office, and Mr. Metcalf from the middle school. So Lou sent out all the proposals today, and our consultant came up with an evaluation tool and a rubric that goes with it. We are looking at them in our office right now, and we're hoping to pull together a meeting shortly after spring break so that we can have a good discussion on May the 3rd at the finance meeting, and then a recommendation at the May 10th meeting. And one of the 3 that we received was the current Chartwells. So any questions on that? The audit RFP is on the street. Proposals are due April 25th. We have had inquiries from several auditing firms. So again, we're hoping to do the same timeline for the audit as the food service. And they would be auditing this year's books to June 30th, 2022. Just an update, at the request of the board, Lou and I met with people, with representatives from Villanova, not the basketball team, and that's actually how they spell their name, that Villa and then Nova and capitals. They're the township healthcare consultant. We are gathering data to send them. Lou and I met on this last week again to get stuff done. Stuff sent to them. So as soon as we can free ourselves of some of these other things that are kind of bogging us down, we're getting that. So we are working on getting them some information. It was a very good meeting. I actually thought they had some good points. So we'll see what they can do. Now, again, I mentioned the capital improvement plan, and you talked minorly about it. I just wanted to kind of give you some food for thought. We're going to have to go down this road. There would actually be 2 capital plans. One would be for major items, and you discussed that. That would be the big stuff. Dr. Scriven said, I mean, the high school desperately needs a renovation. It's your flagship school. It's kind of the place where everybody goes. It's almost one of your community kind of hangouts, so to speak. You got to make that look good. So one of the things would be that, and then whatever you're going to do with Elkins Park, and whatever you're going to do with the place Dr. Scriven's sitting in right now. And then there's the minor items, as Tim alluded to. And there's different ways to fund these plans. I will tell you, the major items will require borrowing money. The minor items can require some things as simple as a modification to your fund balance policy and some funding of what's called a capital reserve fund. You do have a capital reserve fund. It's meant to do minor items, and it's meant for you to budget a line item every year of X amount of dollars. It can be 500,000, it can be $1 million that get transferred into that fund. And then that fund develops a budget for things like the small maintenance items, things that are under what I'll call the major bidding thresholds. They still have, some of these still will have to be bid, but when I'm talking about the bidding thresholds where you have to use the 4 prime contractors to bid. We need this updated at the request of Dr. Scriven too for the major plan. I've requested a proposal from the Pennsylvania Economy League to do a demographic and enrollment study for you. Hopefully we'll have that for next month for you to look at, and they will look at how your buildings are, or how your student numbers lay out in the upcoming years. And then I will tell you, the implementation of this plan, you really need to do something pretty quick. You need a plan. A failure to plan is planning to fail, and you guys have not really planned very well on too many of these capital improvements right now. I know, we've had a lot of disarray in the facilities department with a lot of turnover. Hopefully that will change, but and I call the minor items there deferred maintenance. You pay money when you defer maintenance, so do not defer maintenance. You want to take care of any of that maintenance that you've been previously deferring. So and then we have 4 action items on the agenda for the legislative meeting. You have the solicitor's appointment. We do have a donation from the high school athletic director, got a donation from the Philadelphia Lacrosse Association. Mr. Barone will have details on the Chromebook lease for July 1st of 2022. And one of the things we uncovered in the review of the transportation department is that for the past several years, you haven't approved your bus driver list. Even though they're contracted, you must approve the list of bus drivers every year. So we're putting this year's bus driver list on there for you to approve. And that's what we have. So I know that was a little longer than normal. And thanks for your patience. And Joel, if there's any other questions, we can.
I am looking at the panelists, and I see one question from Ms. Mulhern. Go ahead, Ms. Mulhern.
Thank you. Mr. Linderman, just really quick, the list of the bus drivers to be approved, it seemed very long to me when I went through it. And I don't know, I know we have a lot of buses, and I'm sure I'd be surprised how many we actually have. That's only, does that have to do with turnover or anything? It just seemed very long to me. I don't know what the total number of drivers it was, but I just couldn't have been more surprised.
Well, it's pretty typical, and I will confirm that. I'm just going to give you from my experience. And I came from a place that had probably just about as many buses, maybe more than you guys have.
Mm-hmm.
It's typical to have some buses that may not have the same driver on. Just because you have 50 buses, it doesn't mean you only have 50 drivers.
Sure.
You may have 70 drivers for 50 buses because somebody can't do Fridays, and then you've got substitute drivers who maybe don't always drive. Maybe they've only driven 4 or 5 times, that they got to be on your list. So I'll confirm that with you.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I just was kind of, I expected a few pages, and I think it was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 pages long, and it just kept going. So I just wanted to confirm that seems normal to you, and it sounds like it does.
It would be great if we had that many drivers available every day.
Absolutely.
We are still short drivers, although we are less short drivers, I will tell you, than other school districts. So I know it seems like we're very short, but in the defense of Philly Trans, that's the Cheltenham Trans. I think we're down to, we might even be less than double digits in shortage, or we're right at double digits in shortage. It's pretty good for a fleet our size.
Thank you.
I see Mr. Cohen has his hand raised. Mr. Cohen, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Two questions. First one's rhetorical. About the bus drivers in the list, I assume they followed some type of appropriate vetting process. Since we'll be voting on them, I don't necessarily need to know what it is, but again, I assume there's some type of process in terms of background checks and so on as appropriate and required under state law.
They are required to get the same background checks as a regular school district employee. And in fact, theirs goes a little higher because certain backgrounds cannot get a CDL with certain things, so they have a little higher level. So they all have to be CDL, and they all have to have all the background checks that anybody working in your school district has.
Okay, great, thank you. And the second is not trying to start a long conversation now, but with the future of EP in the high school, as a planner, I do feel it's my obligation to mention that there are questions about where those buildings can go if we either renovate them and have to be closed for a period of time or we build new buildings. And I would just hope and anticipate that would be looked at in terms of the process, either for a major renovation and or new buildings in terms of literally where do those buildings go and are there viable sites for those buildings? Thank you.
And was that your last question, Mr. Cohen?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Or comment? Yes. Okay. And Mr. Epps, you're up.
Mr. Linderman, you mentioned a capital reserve fund, and just on a quick budget doc on board docs, I saw a figure around like 9.4 million in 2020. Is there, and you can make this as brief as needed, is there any best practice in terms of how much should be in the capital reserve fund, whether it's a percentage of, I don't want to answer my own question, but is there any kind of best practice around that?
Well, so there's two types of capital funds. One's the capital project fund, which is what you would generally do when you go to do whatever you're going to do to the high school and whatever you're going to do to EP and the district office. That will be a capital project fund. A capital reserve fund is actually a special revenue fund, and it's actually it's written under the municipal code. I think it's 1431. Ed could do that, and it just requires you have a plan. So if your plan for the next 5 years is that you're going to spend $50 million, then you can have $50 million in that capital reserve fund. If your plan is you're going to spend $10 million, then you can have $10 million in that fund. So it's really up to the board. So the plan, you would have to develop a 5-year plan, and the plan would have to be developed. I had one at Great Valley, and we really watched that plan every year. It was an evolving plan. So every year we'd relook at it, and maybe some year something was scheduled for year 3 and we needed to pull something from year 4 into year 2. And so you move things around. It's almost like the NFL draft. You know, I'm going to push a first round draft pick back 2 years because I need 2 third-round draft picks here or whatever. So it's really whatever you can do once you get going. So we actually had a little chunk of money going in. It was just under $1 million every year went into that fund. And some years when we knew it was going to be bigger, I talk about the fund balance policy. So the fund balance policy that is common around a lot of schools is it basically says that once you've exceeded your 8% that you're allowed in unassigned fund balance, and if you have any money left over that's not committed, assigned, or in the 8% unassigned, say there's like $2 million, the board can authorize the auditors to transfer the money to the capital reserve fund. So that's kind of how some of that money got pushed over into there at some points. And then you have a plan. So, you know, we always knew that every year somebody's parking lots were going to get restriped and realigned. And that's something in the capital reserve fund, because it's a couple $100,000 to do, you know, a lot the size of the high school. You know, it's not that much for the district office. It's not a big lot, but the high school is a huge lot. I probably went on too much for that, but I think your answer was it could be 5 million, it could be 100 million, as long as you have it funded and as long as you have a plan to use it within 5 years.
Right. No, that context is helpful and appreciated. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Epps. Mr. Cohen, you have your hand up again. Was that just because you didn't bring it down, or did you have a new point?
I'm sorry, I didn't recognize him. My arm was getting tired. It's down now, thank you.
Your virtual arm is now lowered, so you can relax. I see no other hands raised. Go out to the public one more time. If there's any questions, I'd look for a raised hand. Not seeing one, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
There was a hand raised right at that last.
Oh, Ms. Haywood, I did not see that in the,
Sorry, Mr.
Participant
Fishbein and the
section.
rest of the board. This is a very quick question. To the extent this is really an opportunity for us to really look at the capital reserve fund policy if we don't have one. And so I would just propose that if we need to get that on the books, we may want to look at that for an upcoming policy committee meeting, so that the board can make some determinations, maybe on the lines of the recommendations of Mr. Linderman, so that we can reserve some money for those capital projects that we know are coming down the road. Not fully, obviously, but at least defray some of that, defray some of those costs going forward. That was it.
thank you, Ms. Haywood, and I would second that. Obviously, we should be dealing with this in policy because, to Mr. Linderman's point, if we fail to plan, we plan to fail. So let's plan not to fail. Did I have a first and a second to adjourn?
There was a first. I'll second Zachary Epps.
I was first.
Okay, thank you. That means the meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.